Thank you, Stephen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you guys here. It was on that July 4th, 1995 that the flags were raised to full staff, and I think Oklahoma began to think we could do this. And as Stephen said, it was a long road, not knowing what was ahead. We were in it together, and today we're in it together again. So honored to have Burns Hargis, Justice Stephen Taylor, John Kennedy here with us. All three happen to be former chairs of this memorial and museum. And as we were looking at reasons to bring people together during the civic season, we wanted to choose statesmen, people who have chosen the state, the people over themselves, and choices and decisions they've made. And these three are certainly an example of that. But what brings us together today is, as we look at this holiday, how do we continue to deal and grapple with hard things going on in our country, but yet still honor our country and our government, which we are. It is made up of people like you and I. And so this week, we really do look back at how a soldier, a decorated soldier, could love his country, but hate his government so much that he could pull up a Ryder truck and kill 168 people. How could that happen? And could it happen again today? Are we back to that same polarization and extremism? So it's easy for the right to say no, and it's easy for the left to say yes, but what's in the middle? And let's figure out on this sacred ground how we can find common ground, and that's the goal for today. So with that, I'm going to pitch it. I think John's going to start us, and then they've got a great lineup, and then they'll hear from your questions, and we'll raise those up, and as Stephen said, we'll get those asked as well. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody here for participating, and I really want to thank Carrie Watkins, the president of the museum and memorial. She's the greatest president and director we could ever have, and Carrie's been here from the very beginning, and I just want us to express our appreciation for bringing us together. Thank you, Carrie. From the birth of our country, we have had internal tension. It's been a tension of beliefs and even tension of personalities. Two of our greatest founders were Jefferson and Hamilton, and Jefferson was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. Hamilton guided us through the financial turmoil when we were a depleted, war-torn land. These two were so different in their beliefs and backgrounds. They also didn't get along personally. But without both of them, we never could have made it as a fledgling nation. In 1968, the United States experienced 30 of its cities on fire, with violence in the streets. We experienced the murder of civil rights hero Martin Luther King and the murder of the probable next president, Bobby Kennedy. We witnessed what was later described as a police riot in the Chicago Park across from the Democratic National Convention. I often wonder if we had a 24-hour news cycle in 1968, if our country could have stayed together. I was 14 at the time. I watched the news every night with my dad, and I needed the reassurance that he gave me. We have survived the Revolutionary War, the catastrophic Civil War, 2 world wars, and so much more. We have stayed together because we're a country of laws, which are powerful words that have withstood the test of time. In difficult times, we must be more patriotic than ever and committed to our principles. This memorial is a sanctuary and is sacred ground for those who paid the ultimate price when citizens use violence against their fellow citizens. That violence is something we must never tolerate. Judge Taylor, Justice Taylor also, has been a great judge for our state, a great Supreme Court judge, and he was the trial judge of the state Terry Nichols trial. Justice Taylor, I think in a lot of our meetings here at the memorial, you talk about the law and you talk about what your experience has been. Maybe you could start us off with that.
Uh, my my answer to nearly all of these questions is a simple student of the law answer, and that is the rule of law. And all the diverse opinions that may be in our community and in our country, bringing everybody back together with the commitment to our Constitution and to the rule of law seems to me to be the only answer that we can all agree upon. Because, and it's not unusual, today we are experiencing in this country, and John just mentioned that there have been other times of great strife in our country, but today we are experiencing times that people have, in a way, it's a simple way to put it, but we have forgotten how to disagree with one another. Disagreement and debate is healthy, but we have forgotten how to disagree, forgotten how to debate. We have gone into our own corners. We tend to have, and this is the biggest problem, I think, is that we tend to have our own truth, that we have our own facts. I'll have my facts and you have your facts, and my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth, and that immediately disallows any meaningful conversation, debate, or disagreement when you don't even agree on what the truth is. You don't agree on what the facts are. Soren Kierkegaard, and I'm going to be trying to quote Kierkegaard, he said there's two ways to fool people. One is that you believe what is not true, and the other is that you refuse to believe what is true. And that summarizes, I think, the difficulty that John has mentioned. It's not new, but it's exacerbated today by social media, by political discourse, and I beg all of us to remember what is important, and that is the rule of law and our way of life and our government that I to this day believe is something worth standing up for, fighting for if necessary, and speaking for.
You know, you had a very dramatic moment in the sentencing of Terry Nichols when would you quote what you quoted to him?
Yeah, the preface to the sentencing comments, and they were, it just came to me when I was on the bench getting ready to sentence him. We were in the process of completing the sentencing proceeding, and he was standing in front of me with the blank, vacant look that he had throughout the entire year that I spent with him in the courtroom. And as all of you know, the motive for this crime that took place here on this sacred ground, the motive was that McVeigh and Nichols hated our government. And they attacked this building in Oklahoma City and killed 168 people because of their hatred of our government and our Constitution and our way of life. And when I was sentencing him, I was so relieved at that moment that we had, after a year of preparation and a 4-month trial, that we had had a fair trial, because that was not a given to begin with, whether we could get a jury and get a trial and come to a verdict. and we were there, and we had a fair trial, and it just hit me when I was sentencing him that, and I said this to him, you know, Mr. Nichols, the government, the Constitution that you hate so much is the Constitution and the government that was good enough and strong enough to give you a fair trial. And that is the essence of our whole society, and particularly the essence of our rule of law. And I just want to mention, I've got two Court of Criminal Appeals judges, Judge Lumpkin and Judge Rowland, who are on the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals and review every criminal conviction. And they're in the audience, and I just want to recognize them and their good work. That's why I said that to him, but I was actually speaking for all of us, and that is the right to a fair trial, the right to presumption of innocence, is only as good as that we can give it to Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh. And if we can't give it to them, then it's a worthless right. And so that was the real test of the rule of law and the real test of the right to a fair trial, that Terry Nichols got a fair trial. And I wanted to tell him that day that the government that he hates so much is the government that's good enough to give him a fair trial. And that's what judges do all over the country every day. Lawyers and judges and jurors. That happens in courtrooms every day all over our country. Really proud of that.
You know, Nichols and Tim McVeigh were, as I understand, were part of the Wolverine militia, or what they call Watchmen, I think. And that organization still exists. And in fact, they were the ones that went after Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan. So you've got these pockets all over the place, and the Southern Policy Law Center kind of keep track of these various sects. And I was looking at some of their numbers, and I have no way to verify this, but something like 169 militias, 128 white nationals, 566 active. So we've got to, and that's just what we know about. And so what we've got to do is really do what everything Steve said. Learn how to disagree. You could just spend an afternoon with Turpin, and you can learn a lot about that. But we always tried to disagree agreeably, and I think that's important. But I think we also have to really start with the youth in our schools. I mean, we've got to explain to them. I don't know this to be a fact, but it seems to me we're shortchanging civics education in the country, and they just don't understand how it works.
Burns, you were a leader in business and in banking and a great lawyer, and then you became a university president. And as my neighbor, I didn't see you for several years, but you were truly a great president, by the way, of Oklahoma State University. What did you notice during your time as president about free speech and the tension of ideas on a college campus?
Well, that's, of course, a real hot button issue now, and with the protests by Palestinian supporters in Columbia and Michigan and UCLA and all the rest. Fortunately, I never had one of those, but I did have a free speech early on in my time up there, and I'd never been a university president. I'd been on the Board of Regents, but I mean, I'm a real novice in how people say, well, you run the university. No, you don't run the university. The faculty run the university. But early on, their library lawn there at Oklahoma State, they built this concrete block wall. It was about 10 or 12 feet tall and it was 8 or 9 feet long. and it had the most vile, vicious, nasty things that had been sprayed on it. And I came back to my office just astounded. I said, well, this is horrible, because we do allow people to demonstrate on that lawn, and you'll get pro-choice and pro-abortion. I mean, you'll get all the way around. But I came into my office and I basically told our general counsel, I was like Reagan, tear down this wall. And the student affairs vice president came to see me and said, listen, what this is they're building this wall with all of this hate on it, and then they're going to knock it down in 2 days with sledgehammers to symbolize eliminating hate. And if you'll just close your blinds and not walk that way, it'll all be over in 2 days. But if you take that wall down now, I mean, you're going to be dealing with this for months. And so, surprisingly, I took her advice. And I really did. I just closed everything, tried to shut it out of my mind. And it did. It just went away. So, but people in college, those kids, and they are still kids, will do some really terrible things. I tried to. We had 3 girls from Okarche, Oklahoma, who had mud packs on their face, and they thought it'd be fun to post that on social media, which happened to be on Martin Luther King Day. And of course, the next morning I had a number of our African American students standing in front of my office, and of course they wanted me to kick those kids out. And I had to explain that you can't. I mean, I don't know the girls were actually being racist about it. They just were kind of being silly, but it was hurtful to a lot of people. But I said, I can't kick them out. I mean, free speech is, you can say anything you want as long as I don't threaten you or your property. And they weren't threatening anybody. It just was. So I actually called the girls to my office and I said, I want you to go to the Afro-Am meeting and just apologize that you unintentionally offended and hurt a lot of people, which they did. And they ended up being a wonderful relationship. So if you can kind of manage it and not sensationalize it, you got a better chance.
Well, we had a meeting here several months ago, and we talked about the 3 people that met at basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. It was Terry Nichols, Tim McVeigh, and it was Michael Fortier. And a lot of people don't know that story, that there was a 3rd person involved. And like Justice Taylor said, their goal, they truly believed when they blew up this building that they were going to bring down the country in a series of chain events, and that other people would engage in similar acts, and that would bring down the United States of America. And something that really strikes me is on this same street on the east, 2 incredible historic acts happened. One was the bombing of this building, which those 3 believed would bring down this country, but what it actually did was bring people together. It brought people together like no one could have imagined, and it was the exact opposite effect that those 3 were trying to do. But just 5 blocks down the street was the birth of the sit-in movement in the United States of America. It happened at Cat's Drug. We're right down the street on Main Street. And that was the exact opposite type activity, in that it was an act of nonviolence. It was 13 children, ages 5 to 15, that went and sat in there. And I think, if nothing else, the lesson we can take from that is how ultimately in our country, violence is not effective, and nonviolence has been. And that is the birth of the sit-in movement. It happened in South Carolina 2 years later, but it was children that pioneered that movement in the United States. And we all know how effective that was. So that just really strikes me every time I drive down Robinson and think, this is one of the most historic streets in the United States of America, and it's all about violence. violence and nonviolence. And I still can't believe how ineffective and how naive they were that they thought they could bring our country down through blowing up this building. And they purposely waited until 9:02 a.m. until everybody was at their desk. All the children were in the daycare. They waited till the worst possible time to do this to a group of innocent Americans. So
I just love to figure, this room, I'm sure, is made up of people that can talk civilly to each other. But I really think it would be great if we could promote gatherings of people that had very different opinions and practice trying to understand the perspective of that person. Why do you believe what you believe? And Steve's right. A lot of times it'll be their truth against your truth. And, we got the classic 20 election. And it's kind of hard to, I'd just like to be, with some humility and empathy, try to really understand what you're thinking and why you believe that. And see if we may end up disagreeing, but at least we know that this isn't an evil person, unless they happen to be, but most aren't.
Justice Taylor, I would say one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard was at the April 19th remembrance when you talked about the breach in our country today. So you tell us a little bit about how those words came to you and how you've reflected on that, because that speech has been replayed all over the country. I based that on the book of Isaiah. In the book of Isaiah, and paraphrasing, but repair the breach was the hope in that writing in the book of Isaiah, to repair the breach. And if you read the entire passage in the book of Isaiah, it's almost like you can visualize Oklahoma City at the time of the bombing, because it talks about repair the breach, and then it talks about the bringing together of a community. And as John said a while ago, after the bombing, the hope of the bombing was to attack the government and weaken the government. And as John said, after the bombing, Oklahoma City came together in a way that is to this day historic. And to this day, that coming together is physically apparent in this city by the buildings and the progress of this city, but more importantly, it is physically apparent by the people in this city who have come together in so many ways, all to a great extent spurred by April 19th, 1995. The comments that I made in the speech were back to learning to have better conversation, like the memorial is trying to foster, and to bring people together. Because the danger that I see is that we are finding ourselves in our own silos, and all we hear are the echoes of our own voice. We choose our news sources based upon how we feel about current events and about political issues. There's a cafeteria of news sources now, and and of course the news sources are in the business of making money, so they cater to their audience, which just exacerbates the idea that part of the country's watching MSNBC, part of the country's watching Fox. You've got rural versus urban, you've got Republican versus Democrat, Fox versus MSNBC, and it ends up with we're a 50% versus 50%
country. And it's not new, but I think it's exacerbated by the media that we have now because of the social media and because of, back in the day it was ABC, CBS, and NBC, Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley and Peter Jennings, and now it's all kinds of channels that will cater to what you believe, and it's social media that caters to what you believe, and we're not exposing ourselves to what other people think because we're refusing to listen. And we're, as I said, and it's an old saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And that's what I'm hoping that we can see through that with better conversations and bringing people together. Starting off in the school and better civics education, more concentration on civics education, I think is a really important thing to consider. Teaching civics and government and the comparison of our government and other governments around the world to make us to have more pride and patriotism in our country for what we have. But I am worried about this, but I am not hopeless at all, because this country's gone through the same problem, just in different times with different vehicles and different factors, but I'm hopeful. The rule of law, I started off talking about the rule of law, and I'm a simple soul, and I really truly believe that the rule of law can bring us together. President Hargis is talking about, campus unrest. We've had unrest in our country over the last few years. Recently, in 2020, we had destruction and damage and riots all over the country in the summer of 2020. And then we had January 6th, 2021. Sad, sad days in our history. The summer of 20 and the January of 21. Sad days in our history. And I answer that with the summer of 2020, the law was broken. You can call it protests, and I understand that. And on January 6, 2021, you can call it a protest, you can call it whatever you want. I call it law breaking. I call rioting in the streets and burning buildings and tearing up public property, I call it law breaking. Breaking down the walls, the doors of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, I don't call it anything but law breaking. It's a violation of the law. It is criminal activity. And so I boil it down to that, and that's how I answer it. That people that do that need to be, in my opinion, need to be held to account by the rule of law. The First Amendment is not a defense to crime. Read that again. The First Amendment is not a defense to crime. The First Amendment gives the right to free expression and the right to peaceful protest, but the First Amendment does not allow criminal activity, and it's not a defense to criminal activity. And people who are in the business that I was in for all of my life hold people account for violating the law. And so that's my tough side, and I will continue to have that view, that when all else fails, the courtroom is where things get settled.
You know, we we talked about this a little bit last week, but a PBS NPR Marist poll conducted in March of '24 asked the question: Do Americans have to resort to violence to get the country back on track? And 28% of Republicans believe that, 12% of Democrats, and 20% overall. Now, we can take solace that it's not the majority, you know, but still, that's unnerving. So I think ultimately, and I don't know if it could happen this time around, but we need a leader in this country that can bridge the gaps. And I think we've had leaders like that over the years. I'm not sure if these two are capable of doing that. And I speak that as a Republican, but
let me speak that. Let me answer that I'm an independent, and I'm not a Republican, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, and very proud of that. And Burns, you're right. We need a leader to bring us together. And let me just say, I don't know how the election's going to come out in November, but I have hope that whoever wins that election in November, I hope that all of us who voted for, or however we voted, whoever wins that election in November, I have hope that somehow or another that new president or a re-elected president can be different and surprise everybody. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Joseph R. Biden or Donald J. Trump, whoever wins, wouldn't it be wonderful if one of them surprises all of us? Because none of us expect either one of them to be able to bring this country together. And they could go down in history, whichever one of them it is, could go down in history, along with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, if they would figure out and call upon themselves to bring us together. And I have hope that that can happen, because they're both intelligent men, that they could figure out that there's a calling, that they're being called. And I would like to think that they would rise above the men that we know now and the men we expect them to be, and rise above that and be something that none of us really expect either one of them to be. Wouldn't that be wonderful if they figured out how to do that? And I'm hoping maybe somehow or another they can be moved to do that.
Well, and we've talked about this before, but the other imperative here for most people, and I think in Congress, are running for president, it's all about getting elected. I mean, they're going to do everything they can to stay in office. And I said this before, but basically the Republicans, if they compromise with the Democrats, they're going to get a primary from the right, and vice versa. And so people are just way too focused on re-election and not enough on governing. And I don't know how we get past that. And you've got this whole cadre of people that make their living off of all that. So they're egging it on and making a lot of money.
I know we have a secret ballot in this country, but I'm voting for Stephen Taylor for president this year.
No.
My favorite president, for the reasons you're talking about, is George Washington, because he brought different points of view into his own cabinet. I talked about Jefferson and Hamilton.
Lincoln did that too.
Well, yeah, Doris Kearns' book, Goodwin wrote a book called Team of Rivals about Lincoln. So our hardest time, I think, was in the very beginning of this country. We were broke. We didn't have many friends, and we had a lot of people that disagreed with each other. But they had to be brought together, and it was that symphony of these different points of view that made our country great. What happened in the Civil War. Those two presidents were recognized for exactly what you're talking about, Justice Taylor, for bringing people together and allowing them to have conflict within our country without becoming violent towards each other.
Well, let's just all hope that either President Trump or President Biden, whoever we select, let's all hope that an epiphany comes, and that man will rise to an occasion that none of us really expect.
You know what you saw with Tom Cole? This guy from Texas moves in here for a week and spends $5 million, whatever it was, against him. And that went on all over the country. It wasn't just here. And he was mad at Tom Cole because Cole voted to fund the government and voted to fund Ukraine. And those were immortal sins as far as they were concerned. So it's, it's frustrating, to say the least.
Stephen, do you have some questions for us from the audience?
I have lots of questions from the audience.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so I'm trying to go thematically. We're just talking about our political leaders, and we're in the midst of an election year. A couple people asked about both of those leaders using, kind of demonizing the other side, right? Biden's trying to use MAGA to turn that into a slur, and Trump is pretty successful at doing the same. And so how do we restore faith in our political leaders when they are actively demonizing the other side, the other political party, the other half of America?
Well, my response to that is that as I said a moment ago, if they want to go down in history, they'll bring us together. If they want to continue the political battle, then they'll go down in history as probably a failed president. Because if the agenda is for either one of them, if the agenda is to maintain the division and maintain my side and demonize the other side, then whoever it is will be a failed president. And if they would change course and work to bring the country together, they would be a president that would go down in history. So I think it's just going to depend on how they want to be viewed in history 200 years from now. We'll still be here in 200 years. Our country will be. The question is, how does Biden or Trump want to be viewed 200 years from now? Were they the one that started the rebirth of our one nation, indivisible? Do they want to be the one to start the rebirth of that?
On kind of a similar note, January 6th was brought up, and there were a few questions about revolving around that. And one of them has to do with the political leaders and how they frame it. And so one of these questions is, you hear on the news and in political speech those who are going through the political process of being prosecuted for their activity on January 6th. Those individuals are being hostages or political prisoners. And so the question is, how do we come to terms with political leaders that are running for president disparaging the political process like that?
Political process should be disparaged. We should have protests. We should have all that. It's when the judicial part of our government gets disparaged. It's when we lose respect for the law. I love a good protest. I had no problem with January 6th until I saw a Capitol police officer being literally almost squeezed to death in a revolving door in the Capitol. When they resorted to violence, they crossed the line. But we have got to allow for protest. We've got to challenge our systems. But January 6th was all about violence. And also, I think the government's done a good job holding those people accountable, like Justice Taylor said. But we have to separate protest from violence. They could not be more different.
Most of those people, another poll had 50-some-odd% of Republicans believe the election was stolen. I was on the election board for many years, and Oklahoma does have one of the finest. We were early on in the electronic voting, but to my knowledge, not one shred of evidence has come up to confirm that any material amount of vote tampering. And yet, I'll guarantee you, most of those people thought that the election was stolen because Trump was saying it was stolen. And that's what I say when you can't agree on the truth. I mean, it's very hard to reach a solution.
There was a question on that, along that line. It says there are your facts and my facts as discussed, but it seems that many are based on how they feel and don't care about the facts. How can we resolve this feelings versus facts dichotomy?
I think through dialogue. I mean, just a civil dialogue, and where you don't talk over each other. You actually try to understand why the other feels the way they feel. You know, all those years with Turpin, I was never trying to persuade him. I was just trying to state my position. I wasn't going to persuade him, and nor I.
I think the answer to that dilemma, and that's a very good question, and I think the answer to that is, dialogue, yes, but to foster dialogue, you need some leadership. And so I come back to my theme, and that is leadership, I think, is the ultimate answer. It requires leaders on both sides of the whatever issue it is, agreeing to lead the people who believe one way or another, to lead them to a dialogue. So without leadership, there's not going to be a healthy dialogue. That's why I come back to whoever's elected president can serve this country in a historic way by being a leader and saying we must come together and discuss these issues. And I think that's the only way it's going to happen. For example, if Donald Trump is elected president, I would love to hear him in his inaugural address say that his number one goal as President of the United States is to bring the country together and pay respect to those who disagree with him. Let that be a beginning.
It'll be a first.
Well, as I said, it's not expected, but think how wonderful it would be if it happened. Maybe we can all hope that it happens, and maybe he'll hear about whatever we're talking about here in this room.
Well, I have about a half dozen questions here involving the recent Supreme Court decisions, and so since we have an esteemed justice on our panel, we should probably address these questions. Most of them dealing with the decision yesterday in which they dealt with the immunity that a sitting president has and doesn't have. And so a lot of people, I think, the questions here show there's some shock in that decision. Does it say that our president is in essence above the law in certain situations? This question is wondering how familiar you are with the case, and if you are, how would you have ruled?
Well, this will tell you what kind of nerd I am. I read the whole opinion last night and all the concurrences and all the dissent. And I'm proud of the United States Supreme Court. That opinion yesterday, you see, it's going to have to be put into practice, and it's going to have to be applied to situations that come before the court before anybody can legitimately criticize it. Let's let district judges put it into practice in the trial court, and then let intermediate courts of appeal look at it and let it be put into practice. It's not as sweeping as it was portrayed on some news outlets last night. They described official acts, and that's essential, that official acts of the president have to be given some immunity to allow the president to carry out the executive functions of the government. But they were trying to write this for the future, and I believe that, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I believe that once this opinion is put into practice, it won't be nearly as bad as all of the hand-wringing that went on last night. The office of the President of the United States is the office that if you have a person who is in that office who is corrupt, then you got a real problem. Even before this opinion was handed down. So you have to trust the American people to elect leaders that we can hand those huge powers to. The opinion, my view is let's let it be test driven. Let it be given practical effect by trial courts, and let specific fact situations, let it apply to specific fact situations. In the case of the cases that are pending right now, the special counsel is going to have to look at the charges that are filed in the Florida classified documents case and the DC Circuit January 6th case, and weed out the official acts and then prosecute the unofficial acts. And even President Trump's lawyers have conceded early on that all of the acts charged are not official acts. There are some that are conceded to be personal acts. The trial court will sift through all this, and that's what trial judges do, and they do it very well. Same thing will happen on the classified documents case. The trial judge down in Florida will sift through it. But let's give that opinion an opportunity to be put into practice before we criticize it. Because it's, I read through all of it, and Justice Sotomayor, she laid down a marker. She did what a good dissent does, and that is lay down a challenge to the majority opinion. And these two judges over here, they know what I'm talking about. Sometimes a dissent is done it is speaking to the majority and challenging the majority. And Sotomayor skillfully challenged the majority with some rhetorical questions. And she served a huge purpose by doing that, because it serves to test the practical effect of the majority opinion. I guarantee you what she wrote will be read by trial judges. And it all works.
They basically set it back to determine what.
Yeah,
what
you gotta
They
separate
never
the-
reached the fact
Nobody's
whether
been,
it's official or unofficial.
so everything's gonna, let me just say, I have confidence that we're gonna be just fine. It's not earth-shattering. It's not as bad as, the sky is falling, as some of the commentators said last night.
Great answer. Thank you.
It's the rule of law. That's the answer to everything, folks. The rule of law.
I'm wondering how many people in the room have read the entire opinion and dissenting opinions. I know one.
They need to get a life if they did.
Okay, there's a similar question speaking to the perception of the Supreme Court and accusations against being overtly political, as well as being influenced by those with a lot of money. And so I'm wondering if that impacts our perception of these Supreme Court rulings when that is something that is, being drummed up in the media. And I don't mean drummed up as if it's right or wrong or factual or infactual. I mean, we're hearing about it.
Judges are under judges, when you become a judge, it is a monastic life. We are governed in Oklahoma by the Code of Judicial Conduct. Federal judges have a code, the trial judges do, the Supreme Court are kind of their own police. But judges have to, we lose our First Amendment rights to begin with. Judges can't go out and get involved in politics, can't make political statements, can't share their opinions on things, because we are expected by the citizens to be fair and impartial. And so I would just say to the 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court, and far be it from me giving them advice, but they just need to be very careful about themselves and their families, their immediate family. That, that's how I lived my life for 34 years. And it's easy and it's difficult, but it's required of judges. And so I would just say to the 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court that they hold a sacred trust, and you have to sacrifice. And one of the things you sacrifice is you cannot be, or your family, immediate family, out expressing opinions about things, because it deteriorates confidence in the courts. So if you're going to be a guardian of the court, if you're going to sit on the bench, you have to give up your right to express your opinion. And your immediate family, unfortunately, suffers that also. So that's my advice to the United States Supreme Court. Be careful what you say, be careful accepting trips and going places and accepting gifts. Be careful of what flags you fly at your house. Be careful about the appearance, because the judicial business, appearances are extremely important, because it fosters confidence in the courts.
Well, we are rapidly running out of time, and I was going to ask each of you, and maybe you each want to speak on this, on how we repair the breach, right? Speaking to Justice Taylor's speech, but said more simply by a teen board member who's here, if you could tell everyone in the United States one thing, right, on this topic, what would it be? And I'd love to hear from each of you.
I would say that we have been through things just like this before. We've been through things much, much worse than this before. And that, like Burns said, we will survive this. And might be hard to see now, but I think we will become better for having gone through this.
Yeah, I just say the word deference. I just think that we should reach out and really have meaningful conversations with each other. And I would love to put together something where you bring in people that are avowed white nationalists and just talk through that. And not that we're going to convince them otherwise, but at least quit hating them. We need to feel sorry for them, but then try to persuade otherwise. But just that's what we have to have. But again, I'll go back. If we don't have a leader that is preaching the same thing, it's going to be very hard. It's, we pointed out at one of these meetings that public trust was at its highest when in the 90s, when you had Newt Gingrich and President
Clinton.
What? Yeah.
Clinton.
Yeah. Last time we had a balanced budget. But you think of all that turmoil when Newt Gingrich rose to power and the contract with America and all that stuff. But for some reason, we all kind of came together.
It's our history.
Yeah.
My to the teen board, our future. My one word would be to be hopeful and optimistic. 2 words, because I really believe that, this sounds probably a little Pollyannish, but I believe the best is yet to come. I really do. 200 years from now, we're gonna be a good, strong people. I have no doubt about that, because I see where we've come, the 200 years that brought us here, and I think the next 200 we'll look back and say, everything's good.
But I do think with the social media and the AI and all the rest, we have to be suspicious of anything we hear or anything we see. I've kind of gotten, if I don't see it with my own eyes, and now with AI, I can hear it sound like my mother, but that'd be pretty scary. She's been gone for a long time.
But. The young teen board will figure it out. I really believe they will.